And welcome to this called meeting of the Northside Board of Trustees. Before calling this meeting to order, the board would like to take just a moment to briefly review some of the rules for conducting our meeting. The order of business for this meeting is set out in the agenda. The purpose of this meeting is to conduct board business, and for that reason, it is held in public. It's not a public forum, however, we do provide the opportunity for audience participation. If there is anyone who would like to address the board during an agenda item, we ask that you please complete a sign-up sheet located at the entrance to this room. This is so we do not overlook anyone who would like to speak to the board. We will review the rules for addressing the board later in the meeting. Is there anyone here who would like to sign up to an agenda item that has not already done so? Okay, the meeting will then be officially called to order. Please stand and bow your heads as Trustee Melissa Chumley leads us in the invocation and pledges of allegiance.
Almighty and merciful God, we ask your guidance and blessings upon this board, students, parents, patrons, teachers, and administrators, as we are assembled here this evening in the common pursuit of this great nation's wealth, our children. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Chumley.
You're welcome.
So the first item on the agenda, we do have one person who has signed up to speak to the budget review. So we'll wait till we get to that part of the agenda.
See if I can get this.
We do have one item under consent agenda. Is there a motion?
Yes, I need board docs.
This item was discussed at building committee on Monday.
Item number 9 for your review.
I'm sorry, I can't get my
Okay.
system up
It's
yet.
the,
It's,
okay.
what is it, Karen?
It's a
Flooring contractor at Broccoli.
Okay, and that's,
We looked at colors
Jacob?
as well as the,
and so that's being approved with the change that we made in relation to the flooring pattern.
this is,
Okay,
yeah, we'll bring colors back. This is purely selecting a contractor so they can mobilize and get the work done this summer.
I move approval of the
Second.
consent agenda.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the one consent agenda item. Any questions on that? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Ayes have it, motion carries. And the next item on the agenda is budget review. So to my fellow board members, this is quite lengthy, and normally during budget review, sometimes we ask questions. So if it's okay, I'm just going to have after I read the announcements for citizens to be heard, I'm just going to bring up our person to make the comments. Okay. We believe citizens to be heard is important and meaningful, and we will listen to what you have to say. We value your opinion, although we are restrained by law from taking any action. We ask you that you please address your remarks to the board, confine your remarks to a Northside policy or practice, limit your remarks to 3 minutes. At 3 minutes, you will be asked to wrap up your remarks. Our board secretary, Mr. Joseph Medina, has a yellow card in which he'll hold up at the end of 2 minutes. And then at the end of 3, he'll hold up the red card, and that means that your time is up. We ask you that do not make personal attacks on individuals. Dr. Woods?
The only person signed up is Aseneth Medina.
Okay.
Good evening, school board trustees and Dr. Woods. I am Asenet Medina, and I am the treasurer of the Northside American Federation of Teachers. And I'm here to address the upcoming compensation discussions and decisions that you'll be making soon. And what we've learned is that in studying the past 7 years of the NISD schedule of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance, we've discovered that there's been a pattern displayed, that there has been an underestimation of revenues and overestimation of expenditures every year for several years. For example, in 2018, 2019, approximately 3 years ago, the district predicted a 41 million general fund budget shortfall, 41 million predicted shortfall. It had nearly a $12 million general fund surplus. 2 years ago, for 2019, 2020, the district predicted a 24 million general fund budget shortfall again, but ended the year with a $46 million surplus. Last year, 2020, 2021, in the midst of the pandemic, which we understand and we all do, the district predicted a $43 million budget shortfall. But again, there was a surplus of approximately $60,000 in the general fund. And all this indicates valuable monies that have been captured, recaptured, with which the district can work with. Now, we know the district has lost a number of students to various agencies during the time of pandemic, but we want to highlight that the fewer students we have means the fewer staff there is to support those students. There are fewer teachers, fewer IAs, bus drivers, central office staff, which we do need to keep the daily activities of the school system operating, which means less payroll expenditures. Now, we'd like you to keep this in mind, that Northside AFT is asking the district to prioritize frontline workers who directly deliver services to NISD, again, such as the teachers, IAs, bus drivers, and other support personnel. They are the ones responsible for the daily functions of our district that keep moving. Why, we'd like for you to offer them better compensation, which is paramount. While we're happy to see the district is offering a signing bonus for new teachers, we, Northside AFT, would like for the district to consider the employees who have remained loyal throughout this time. We would like the district to consider giving them a substantial raise that will cover beyond and projected insurance increases, which will be coming next year. Again, Northside AFT continues to ask the employees receive a 4.5 increase to teacher pay to be able to better meet the economic demands placed upon their families and our families. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next item on the agenda is our budget review. Dr. Woods or Dr. Barajas?
So, Dr. Barajas will give the presentation as usual. I'll interject. I just want to set kind of where we stand as we go into tonight. Obviously, we are now past a bond election, and that enabled us to finalize some preliminary recommendations, and I do want to emphasize preliminary, to the board on the expenditure side of the 22-23 budget. What you will not see is a discussion about revenue in 22-23. We plan to bring that in a month or so when we feel like our best estimates of that number will be more accurate. As you have been hearing all year long, the issues around enrollment and actually, frankly, the bigger concern of average daily attendance are with us still. And it would be foolish not to assume that that will stay with us to some degree, at least in the near term, certainly for 22-23. And so we will assume that when we try to calculate estimated revenue for 22-23. So what we mostly will bring you tonight is a discussion around building the budget, again, on the expenses side for next year. That involves two main items, and this is true every year. It's not unique to this year. That is compensation and what we have traditionally called growth and improvement that now also includes various mandatory cost increases like utility costs and so forth. You will see, frankly, substantial numbers being proposed on both sides with regard to growth and improvement. around areas where the district's population is growing, namely special education, bilingual and ESL. As you know, we're trying to finish some initiatives that we began 3 years ago, some of which were put on pause during the pandemic, including STEM labs at elementary schools and pre-K, full-day pre-K expansion at Northside Elementary Schools. So you will see a theme along what is, we feel like, the most needed in growth and improvement. And then again, some that are just flat mandatory costs. And then on the compensation side, you will see another fairly substantial number proposed. Now, I say all of this to say, and emphasize the word preliminary, to say that I fully realize that once anybody says anything with any specificity about compensation, that's really hard to roll back. And I get that. I'm knowledgeable about that. But if our revenue estimates come in substantially lower than where I think they are sitting as we sit here today, we will have to cut back drastically on the growth and improvement packages that you see, and that would then be reflected when this is finally brought to the board for consideration at that late June meeting, which again is the typical timeline to bring growth and improvement and compensation. We did not, though, want to get any later in the spring without showing this to the board and giving the board some time to study and ask questions and those kinds of things. And so while it's not as early as we would in a normal year, these are hardly normal budget development times. What we will present to you on the compensation side is very much in line, if not slightly better than, what my colleagues and I have discussed over the last many months in Bear and surrounding counties. The notion of being mindful of what all of us are going through with regard to inflationary pressure on our individual budgets is one that obviously we keep in mind. It is, however, cannot be the driving force in the development of a school budget. There is no mechanism in the school finance system, as you all well know, just to reiterate for posterity, to track inflationary costs on a school district. There is no mechanism for that. We count on the legislature to change the basic allotment, and only at their whim does that happen, frankly. And so decisions that we have made in the past to set aside dollars in fund balance are what gives us the confidence to bring these recommendations forth. Were it not for that, you would not be seeing any recommendations we would have had other than canvassing no reason to have this meeting tonight. So I just want to lay out where we stand with regard to budget development. Anything that we discuss tonight from a total dollar perspective cannot be added to. It cannot. Anything that was moved has to have an equal, if not greater, subtraction somewhere else in next year's budget. Hasn't always been the case. We've had a lot more wiggle room in the past. That is not the case any longer. I just want to be crystal clear about that before we get into the details of this, so that the board members have a full understanding of, while we are bringing a proposal for some improvements to staffing to better serve our students and some improvements to compensation to pay our employees for what they're worth and to keep them, frankly, near the top of the market in almost every job category. That is not a blank check and cannot be viewed as such. What you will see tonight is a recommendation for a total improvement package, if you will, of nearly $45 million. So we're going to break that down for the board, talk about it with some specificity, especially with regard to growth and improvement, and a little bit with compensation. Happy to answer questions, tell you where our head is, what we're thinking, and then that gives you 6 weeks to think and ask things before we will bring this back to you at the end of June for your consideration, with whatever adjustments get made in that period of time. So with that, Ms. Freeman, if there are no questions or comments, I will turn it over to Dr. Barajas.
Wait, Brian, before you do that, okay, just very layman's terms, the biggest difference that is driving this in relation to what you're talking about versus what we have had in the past is the costs that we've had with COVID, the relationship to our funding with student attendance. And though we can't factor in inflation, inflation's got to be having a,
Of course. We pay
an-
higher fuel bills just like
an-
everybody does.
yeah,
We pay
and-
higher
and-
food costs just like everybody does.
an impact. And so that pretty much is,
I don't know that I would characterize lingering COVID expenditures as between ESSER dollars and use of fund balance, frankly. We have covered those costs, and those are now, unless something drastically changes with regard to COVID, largely in the past. Prior budgets, long ago. We don't forecast lingering costs there. Everything else you said is accurate. We face inflationary pressures just like all of us face in our personal budgets. We pay increased fuel costs just like all of us are doing. Food costs, everything else. Goodness knows, those of you who are members of the building committee who come to those meetings, and we talk about construction costs. We pay higher construction costs just like a homeowner or a home builder or a home buyer would. There's no difference in that whatsoever. And over the years, we have supplemented those projects oftentimes with general fund dollars. It is what it is. So what's really driving the change for districts everywhere in Texas is the way schools are funded based on ADA, average daily attendance, which is tied to enrollment and it's tied to how many kids show up each day. That's what's driving much more conservative than any school leader, any trustee, any superintendent would prefer in every single state, or in every single city and town and district in this state. What you will see happen in the next 2 months is a rollout of conversations that will get repeated like the one tonight over and over and over again about we'd love to do more, we know everybody's hurting with inflation. This is the dead level best of what we can do. I've seen districts in this state already approve budgets that I know they cannot afford, frankly.
and is that because of the hope that we'll get some relief in the next legislative session?
No. That's to survive politically for the next year or two. These are people who, trustees, who love what they do. They love kids, they love teachers, but they got to continue to be elected in office. These are superintendents who have families of their own and need to work. They make the decisions that they make, and it is not my business to be critical of anybody else's situation. That is not my place. When people call me and they tell me where they are and they ask, I learn about it. I am not going to recommend that we, staff, are not going to recommend that we put ourselves in a similar position.
Well, we've never done that.
Where 2 years from now, we look back and we say, what happened to all that fund balance? And if we have to make cuts, we look back and we say, wow, I'm really glad we could do that over a 2-year, 4-year, 5-year period of time, not overnight.
Well, I think we need to remember that because we have always been so conservative in relation to our ending fund balance and the way that we run our budget, when we came through that time period, and I'm trying to remember, was it
2011.
in 11, right? I get mixed up with what happened with the economy in 8. 2011, we were one of the few school districts in the state that did not RIF employees.
Exactly right. And there was one reason for that.
We kept all
And
of
that was-
them.
And that was fund balance. Instead of coming to a funding cliff, which asked me to predict what's going to happen in the 2025 legislative session, I think I've already given you this speech. When we came to a funding cliff at the state level, when the federal stimulus money went away, guess what happens in 2024? The federal stimulus money is going away. We didn't have to RIF people. We didn't have to fire people. glid down on expenditures using attrition, not saying to people, you're out.
And we displaced, but we displaced.
It was painful. Don't get me wrong. It was painful.
To a job. We put nobody to the street, and I think that's
Didn't cost
really-
anybody any money. If they were a teacher doing
Remember that.
something, we put them as a teacher doing something else, and not everybody loved it. I'm not gonna say it was roses and daisies, but nobody hit the street.
Nobody lost their job.
So I caution us, and I'll probably do the same thing in a year. Whenever we talk about budget in the past, I know we've set expectations, all of us, me included, around we've got wiggle room. Got a little cushion here. Those days, unless things substantially change with regard to enrollment or attendance or how schools are funded in Texas from a policy perspective, capital P policy perspective, this isn't gonna change. We'll all have to have reasonable expectations and real honest conversations like the one we're having now about where this is headed.
And Brian, can you just, again, layman's terms, explain how there is a formula that is used to determine what our ADA is that we're paid from the state? Because it varies, like our school district isn't necessarily paid the same as what another school district is paid.
There's a lot of complexities to it. So let me try to avoid some of that stuff, which means I'm going to give you a real ballpark answer.
Yeah.
So
That's what-
the biggest two factors in determining how schools are funded in Texas is how many kids do you have and how much do they show up in a year. So everybody gets all that, right? It's enrollment and attendance. Now, there are a lot of intricacies beyond that include how are those children who are showing up each day being served? Are they career and technology students? Are they special education students? Are they bilingual or dual language students? Those students all draw additional funding because they're in programs that cost dollars to support, right? And so it's important to recognize that, and the state does, to their credit. Do they recognize it in a way that's equal to the cost of the programs?
No.
No, not always. But if you take out that level of kind of detail, if you will, the bulk of it is those two variables. And when one, or in most districts' case, in the current year, both of those variables are lower than you could have ever predicted they could have been, and we have no reason to believe on a go-forward basis that we will see significant improvement in those numbers. Again, I'm not speaking for Northside, I'm speaking for everybody, almost, except for that rare, fast-growth district that just passed a TRE, and there aren't many of those around, pretty much speaking for the universe here, at least in this state. That's what determines the situation. That's what I fully realize, that folks are rightly confused that districts most districts have a lot of federal dollars. They do. That is a true statement. It is what it is. What those dollars are not is dollars that can cover most of the costs that you will see talked about tonight. These are, by and large, recurring, always going to be in the budget type costs. Once we compensate $1 more or $100 more or $1 million more than we compensate this year, there is no expectation that that compensation will ever go away unless you bleed down staff. Do we have fewer staff now than we did 2 years ago? Slightly, yes. When you bleed down kids, you do not bleed down staff at the same ratio or rate that you bleed down kids. The building still needs to be clean. Librarians still have work to do, whether they're serving 800 kids or 750 kids. That staff doesn't go away.
Well,
Just knows the work of the nurse doesn't go away. And that third grade teacher is going to teach whether there's 22 kids in there or 20 or 21.
and even as we saw numbers fall with our attendance, we didn't riff teachers.
Of course not.
Our
Never have, not since
nurses,
I've been around.
Our custodians,
We-
our
no,
cafeteria
on the contrary,
workers.
we added because we knew kids needed lots of support. We knew, goodness knows, our nurses needed lots of support. Instead, we added.
And Brian, what is the state, just that, before you add in all of the programs piece and additional costs that causes the deviation between districts, what is the per dollar or per student dollar that the state,
The basic allotment is.
the basic allotment?
6160. 6,160 is a basic allotment.
Which is up somewhat substantially after House Bill 3, frankly.
Okay.
All right, I did not mean for that to go on that long.
Well,
No, I needed it, guys. It's been a while since we've gotten down to the very basic piece of what our budget is, and I didn't know, the numbers have changed on that basic allotment over the years.
And Dr. Woods,
Only
without
once recently.
continuing to go down this hill, but I think I'd like you to talk about this too. So, as property values go up, and we've been trying to explain that with the bond, as property values go up, the state tells us that we need to decrease our maintenance and operations rate by a certain amount, and then the state has agreed to make us whole through that, because right now they have the funds in which to do so. We also just had a couple of constitutional amendments where homestead exemptions went up, and the state is supposed to make us whole. And then with those that qualify, the tax cap will decrease as the M&O side goes down. So that's a concern, if I'm correct. And that would also contribute to this funding cliff that you're looking at in 2025?
When House Bill 3 passed in 2019, we all celebrated its passage. It meant more money for schools almost universally. It meant more money, especially for teachers, but really for employees generally, prioritized towards teachers. We celebrated it, and for good reason. But quietly, several of us said, well, I hope they can afford this in 4 years. And the cost of House Bill 3, as you just said, well, is only, especially in a state like Texas, very fast growing with regard to population, very fast growing with regard to property values, as we've all discussed. The cost of House Bill 3 will accelerate again and again and again, and it'll compound, right? It's the same as the dollars we'll discuss tonight. They're recurring. They don't, unless you assume somehow property values are going to start to go down, which I don't know about you, but I wouldn't bet the over-under on that. But unless you're willing to believe that, that cost is going to continue to accelerate. It's one of the concerns that I have about this coming session that has nothing to do with this budget. It's that the state will do exactly what it did in 2009. It will be flush with federal dollars, be flush with state money due to property taxes and sales tax increases. It will write checks it cannot cash in the future. And they'll come back in a session, which is why I predicted 2025, and say, oh, look, we got all this stuff out there we can't afford. And I don't think this is a political statement. How realistic is to expect them to walk back property tax cuts once they're made? That is an unreasonable expectation. It is easier, frankly, to cut spending than it is to go back to property owners and say, we can't afford the tax break we just gave you. It's a lot more politically palatable. And we know where the lion's share of that burden fell in 2011. It fell on the backs of public school teachers and kids. And if there is a repeat of that, love to be wrong. Like I've said many times in the last 2+ years, love to be wrong. But if there's a repeat of that, even in a much smaller way than what we saw in 2011 as a percentage of the total budget in the state, even if it was half of that, that could equate to a funding cut in Northside somewhere around the $45 million a year mark. So, and this is half of the impact of 2011 in inflation-adjusted, budget-adjusted dollars. And that's off the top of my head. But it wouldn't be far. The cut, if you recall back then, those of you who were on the board, was $60 million. And the district is much bigger and a much larger budget since that time. So if that were to happen again, we want to set ourselves up to be in a situation in the fall of 2025 when a very painful budget is being developed to do what we did back then. It will be long past memory, 14 years before,
Yeah,
where we didn't
it was
tell
painful.
employees you couldn't stay, you couldn't have a job back then when a lot of folks didn't have a job. I know these days, it's different. And we would be able to glide down with expenditures over time rather than face a funding cliff.
Which if we don't preserve ending fund balance, we won't be in that position. And if we
You'll be in a
keep
financial
adding
crisis.
recurring cost,
You'll be adding, you would end up declaring financial exigency, which opens the door to a rift.
can't do that. And then one other thing which I just need to catch up again on, because we always talk about during the bond, there was, well, you're getting all this property tax income now, but as that comes in, the state lowers their portion, and there used to be that 1 year period where we had the benefit from that, but that was gone, and I thought that was part of
It is.
House Bill 3 as well.
Was. You heard us talk about the move from what we used to call prior year values to current year values. That's what generated the lag that you're talking about that was beneficial for lots of districts, and Northside was certainly one of those districts. That went away with House Bill 3, but because the basic allotment increased, we didn't love it, but it was a trade-off, and we made the trade-off. That is, everything you just said is correct. So as local values go up, the state will compress local tax rates.
Rates.
You've seen that every year since 2019. There's no doubt in our mind that you will see it again when we bring the final budget to you and, later in the summer. And again, it's not a political statement. That's good. That's good for property owners. It's good for small business owners especially. It's not a bad thing. But there is a reality that's tied to that. And while folks get confused because the property assessment says Northside Independent School District, and they can compare last year's what dollars were paid to the district compared to this year's dollars paid to the district. That's not the way that works. They're not writing a check to the school district, right? The state is essentially sweeping those dollars to pay for a whole host of services, some of which is schools. So again, I'm not being critical. I'm just trying to explain the realities of the way the formulas work. All right.
Thank you.
That said, all that news later. We'll go into the budget conversation. Renee's going to show you very briefly a recap of something you've already seen with regard to current year revenues. Then we'll launch into 22-23. Before we get started, I want to recognize Tiffany and Esperanza, without whom none of this that you're seeing tonight would have come together. And I know Renee would be the first to say that. And they really help us on the detail side of it to get it right. So that what we say to you in the board meeting actually happens for employees with positions in programs and so forth. All right. Sorry for the long preamble.
No, I appreciate it, Brian, and
I was mostly apologizing to Renee, but yeah.
that's okay. Renee's a big boy.
Okay, so lots of thoughts running through. I've been around a long time. 2009, I was in a district that suffered through the ARA days and the funding cliff after that. So, but that was back then. That was antediluvian. Now we're here in this other time period where I'd like the board to consider that in 1920, at the end of 1920, that's when COVID hit, right? And we were helped out then with adjustments with ADA. Actually, they clawed back some of our ESSER money, but that's $17 million and change, I think. So, but then we went into 2021 and 21-22. I consider those 24 months, which will be ending in August, to be really the COVID years. That 2-year period. we have not had to really live on our own ADA for those 2 years because TEA, at least this past year, came out with this TPAR, which we're gonna jump into. But we're talking about building a budget for 22, 23 when we are finally on our own, right? We are not anticipating any kind of federal assistance and, adjustment from the state. What ADA is, what enrollment is what you're gonna live with. And we're trying to build a budget around those unknowns. But because we are finishing 21, 22, normally, 21, 22 is waning, and we don't worry about it anymore. We're more concerned with the current budget. But we have been talking about 21, 22 since February about where we are, because in essence, we know more about what our ADA is going to be because of the TPAR, the target percentage attendance rate. So if we can go to the next slide. Finance Committee saw this last week, but for the full board, what we wanted to cover is now we know what the state is going to make an adjustment for our attendance rate for the first 4 6-week periods for 21, 22, and we know what that is now. So on our own, our actual average attendance rate for the first 4 6 weeks is 91.55. But TEA is going to assign to us 94.75, going back to 1920s first 4 6-week period, so we get the benefit of a higher average daily attendance. They are not helping us at all with enrollment, low enrollment, it's just on the average daily attendance. So that's why it's called the target percentage attendance rate. So we now have a better sense of how we think we will end the year. But the 5th 6 weeks and the 6th 6 weeks, we are completely on our own. So we have to take this adjustment from the state, add the 5th 6 weeks and the 6th 6 weeks, which of course, the 5th 6 weeks is over, but we're still not sure exactly what that attendance rate is. Add the 6th 6 weeks, it's gonna be an estimate, put it all together, and that is what we can present to the superintendent about how we think we're gonna end the year. Now, I say that only because in the first COVID year, 2021, it is true that we had a pretty good year that year. But what TEA giveth, it also taketh away, right? So I think over that 24-month period, you'll see that essentially we may break even during that time period. Getting ready only for 22, 23, and beyond, when it appears as though we are going to be completely on our own with no state assistance or even federal assistance. Even though ESSER 3 will still live during 22, 23, that's separate from the general fund. So everything you'll see tonight on the expenditure side is going to be borne by the general fund, right? So there's no blending between, ESSER is going to pick this up. We are talking about general fund dollars on the expenditure side to be later countered on the other side of the coin when we go through and calculate what our revenues are going to be based on, again, estimates of how many kids are going to show up next year. What is our maximum compressed tax rate going to be? What are property values going to be? To the discussion earlier about what if we get a 15% increase in property values? That's going to push the MCR down, the tax rate, M&O tax rate. So a lot of things are happening as we are building the budget. So I think it was prudent for us to, as the superintendent mentioned, for us to at least cover the other side of the coin, which everybody helps you figure out how to spend the money, but there's only 5 people in the entire district who can calculate how much revenue we're going to get, and 3 of them are in this room.
And
So-
I'm not one of them.
So, but again, we're very conscientious about this, and it is, I work with a very good group who's very punctilious about going through and making sure every single point is in there, because we want to eke out every dollar we can to present in front of the superintendent and the board to say, we can guarantee you that we think we're going to get this dollar. So therefore, there's an offsetting expenditure related to that. So we don't get into a situation of presenting revenue that doesn't materialize, and then we're dipping into fund balance, so.
So before we leave and move on, I do want to say, I think it's highly likely that the final budget adjustment for this year, for the current budget, will be a deficit. We will bring the board a deficit budget for the first time I can recall at the end of a year in a very, very long time, hearkening back to 2011, 12 days. I think that's highly likely. And that accounts for all of the dollars that were saved from unfilled positions or positions that were vacant for long periods of time. And I anticipate we will bring to the board a final approval of a budget to close out 22, 23, 21, 22.
21, 22, yeah.
That will be a deficit. All right, moving on.
No, don't. So is your preference that we ask questions when we're on it, or
That's up to
come
the
back
board.
to it?
That's up to y'all.
What's y'all's?
I go ahead, if this pertains to
Yeah,
this,
it do,
yes.
it does, it
Okay.
does. So,
Ms. Chumley?
okay, so Renee, I'm sorry, but you're just gonna have to walk me through slowly, okay, on it. So the state said that we're gonna use what our 1920 ADA was. So that's the TPAR, right?
Yes.
Okay, so then we took what is our actual attendance, right? I'll tell you where I'm confused, is at the very end, when we did our ADA adjustments that were using the 91 for our ADA, so we took the 90, how did you get that? Is that that middle thing where you took what was our actual attendance and then what we anticipate fifth and sixth week periods to be, and then just average that, and that's what we came up with?
Yeah, so at the very bottom, where it says annual ADA, if we went with our estimate of fifth 6 weeks and sixth 6 weeks, that is the number that we would be funded on, the 91,839.
Okay, so I'm confused though, because the state's given us the 94% for the first, up to the fifth 6 weeks, right?
That's what generates.
Yes, but
That's what generates under that, again, on the bar bottom, on the left side of that, average 4 6 weeks. That's what generates that higher number. You see substantially higher of the average of the 4 because it has TAPR applied to it.
But wasn't that, okay, so I'm sorry, because I'm
So,
confused on it. So
92,883.926
is the average of the 4 6 weeks, but didn't they give
With-
us the
with the
94?
taper.
That's
Didn't they
correct.
give us the 94%
That
for the
is
4
with
6 weeks?
That is with 94.75 applied to the first 4 cycles.
On our own, we're 89,750, so you see that is the difference. So there.
It's a substantial difference.
That's correct.
Okay, so, but how is the average of the first 4 6 weeks 92% when they gave us 94%?
Where are you getting 92%?
It's not percent. That's a number, 92,883.
Okay, see, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm trying to follow where you are on this. So on the top, it was 94.75, so 94.75% of our actual student body was the 92,863
Correct.
That is the derived
from the
bump up,
from,
the 89,750, so they are
So-
giving us credit as if those first 4 6 weeks, we average
92,000.
That's correct.
okay, all right. And then you're just gonna have to bear with me here, because I'm not used to how, I just need to get used to how you have this designed.
But this is TEA's design, not mine. Yeah, this is TEA.
Well, then that may explain why,
Yeah,
Renee.
yeah.
Why I have
Mine
these,
would be much more elegant.
why
but-
I have these questions. So then that's why we're saying, but on the fifth and sixth, they left it to us, so,
We're on our
so
own.
we're on our own on that. And so that's where we end up with the 91,879. And so what you're saying is that basic allotment plus whatever the difference is with the programs piece and the extra funds is what we're gonna be paid on 91,000 students plus
Estimate.
92,000
Estimate. Yeah.
estimate. Okay, I'm sorry, I just needed to walk through that.
There you go. You got it. All right, on to 22-23.
Okay, so leaving 21, 22 in the rearview mirror. Okay, so there are 2 components to the budget proposal, preliminary proposal. It's compensation and then growth and improvement, G&I. The total, as Dr. Woods mentioned, is about $45 million, 44.7. 43% of that is represented in a proposed compensation plan. 57%, 43% for comp, 57% is for G&I. So that's the grand total we're gonna be talking about that we're gonna be showing you tonight. That is where we are right now with all the expenditures that have been coming in between compensation and then G&I. So just to reiterate, I know that the board has seen this before, September of 2021, the board approved us increasing the sub rates because like many other districts, we are having trouble getting subs. That's going to continue, or at least proposed to continue into the next fiscal year 22-23.
NGI, you said NGIA? What does that stand for?
No, G and I, growth and improvement.
Oh, just
G and
G&I.
I, yeah.
I'm sorry, I thought you said NG and I,
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
That's an insurance company, I think. No, but we just wanted to let you know that right now in the budget, there is no proposal to say, let's scale back all the sub rate. And we probably knew back in September that once we set that new rate, we were gonna continue it. Because I don't think any district has come out and said, we're gonna pull that sub rate back, because they would be in a bind, just like we all were back when we were trying to get subs. So that's gonna continue going forward.
is SAISD still doing the $200? Do we
I
know?
have no idea what they do.
So they haven't pulled back either?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, the issue's not gone away.
And again, depending on what we start with in August, September, it could be that we have HR coming to us and saying, we got to bump it up because everybody else did. So again, that's kind of the world we're living in. If we are not getting the subs we need, it may be that we have to look at potentially increasing it, just like we did this next year. So, nothing is off the table regarding what's going to happen in September. So what a fun time to be in school business. So on the next slide, now we get into the other components, which are new to 22-23. Normally, in addition to the general increase, the GI, that is the larger of the component of compensation, we have things like market salary adjustments, stipend changes, and reclassifications. So what we're showing here is a Whitman sampler of kind of what we have currently in the proposal as what we've gone through. So the district has had a history of trying to bring positions up to 90% of market, 92% of market, whatever the case may be. So in that first bullet, you can see that there was an attempt to bring positions anywhere between 90 to 100% of market based on discussions with the superintendent. So you kind of see where those particular groups are: special education aides, self-contained in general, a little bit over 1 million, classroom teacher aides, library aides, so on and so forth, all the way down to other positions, which was about $29,000. The second bullet, for instance, increasing current stipends. This is a usual customary thing where we look at stipends in relation to where stipends are in other school districts and whether or not we have to make adjustments. So you can see the amount there for special education stipends is about $283,000. And then those other miscellaneous stipends for about $14,750. And then to round it out, some other reclassifications: athletic coordinators and transportation station managers for reclassifications.
I have a question real quick.
Sure.
When we talk about when we're increasing the salary or, asking for or we're looking at this increase in the salaries, these are all positions that are in a step format, right? I mean, their positions are in a step format.
No, these actually, I don't think any
They're
of these
classifications or
are,
something like that?
are on the hiring schedule.
Okay, the
I
hiring.
believe these are actually on a midpoint scale.
Okay,
Yeah,
midpoint scale.
they're-
With one exception.
Yeah.
Well, a couple of exceptions. So, like the special education teachers would not be, athletic coordinators actually are. Yeah, so the one exception is special education teachers.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to make sure, because what I was looking at is I wanted to make sure that we weren't, paying, let's say, the salary, if I'm understanding it correctly, that whoever comes in, there is a difference in salary from a one-year teacher to a fifth-year teacher, things like that wouldn't happen. So am I correct that won't happen?
No change to
No
that.
change at all, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Thanks.
Next slide. So just giving you.
Wait,
Excuse me just a minute. Dr. Harrell, I don't see your light, I'm sorry.
Oh.
As a matter of fact, I
Rainey?
don't know if our lights
Here,
are
let me do it again.
on.
Did it come on?
No.
Yeah, none of our lights are working.
I'll just blink a whole bunch.
Okay, you'll just have to,
So I just had a real quick question on the stipend amounts. Are those the only stipends? Because I thought I read the other day, bilingual ESL, are we not doing math and science anymore? Things like that.
No, none of the ones that exist now are proposed to change.
Okay,
These are
so
ones
these
that
are
are
only in
increasing.
addition to.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah,
gotcha.
no, there's, nothing that you see tonight is a reduction in anything that already exists.
So, I get special ed, but why not ESL?
That's included actually in the current budget,
Okay,
because that's a major need
okay,
that we did on the fly during the year.
okay. Thank
Do we
you.
still have the the critical needs areas that have stipends that we used
Absolutely.
to?
Absolutely,
And department chair
of course.
stipends?
All that's the same.
And so we're saying none of those are
Changing.
changing. And what you're saying here is the miscellaneous stipends in athletics and fine arts is only going to be $14,750
For
more?
the year. I mean, we're
For
not
the
talking
year.
about a
So,
lot.
so we're talking just a few minimal
Very small.
positions where,
We're just bringing to market.
yeah, that we're just bringing those up.
$100
compared.
adjustment, a $200 adjustment, something like that.
And I remember, and I'm trying, it was when Dub Ferris was here. No, I think Stan did it too, where we had changed some of the athletics, where instead of stipends, we added days. And so
That got reversed. We went away from that.
I remember when we
8
added
years
it, and then
ago,
was it
something like
Stan, was
that.
it with Stan
Yeah.
where we,
Yeah.
where we went away from it?
Went away from that just to straight stipends based on events.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wasn't sure. I wanted to make sure on that. Thank you.
Ms. Saldana?
On the critical needs that you were saying that we still give that stipend, that's not all critical need teachers, right? That's only the ones that have been in Northside.
No,
For you-
if we determine that an area is a critical need, for example, ESL or bilingual, we'll pay the stipend to everybody who teaches it, whether their first year on the job or 30th year on the
So
job.
we're still talking about math being critical needs?
Has been for a
And they-
long time, I think.
They all get that?
Corinne, I don't have the current list in front of me. We'd have to get you a report on, where those sit today. But they've switched over time, right? What was a critical need 15 years ago may not still be today, and vice versa, right? So we'd have to get a report. Again, all we're reporting are changes proposed for next year, not doing away with anything that
No,
currently
no, I
exists.
understand that, but when you said about critical needs, that we're still giving those stipends, I was under the impression that that stopped and that there are teachers that work in a critical need area, but they're not getting the stipend.
If we decided that that was no longer a critical need, or frankly, these days, not as critical a need as some others, we may have removed it in
Okay.
other cycles.
All right, thank you.
We're not proposing to remove any for next year.
Okay, thank you.
Brian, when we're doing our market comparisons, are we looking at, how do we do that in relation to CTE?
You look at surrounding districts. It's the same comparison group you'd look at for any professional educator. There's so many in surrounding districts, you get plenty of data.
Okay. And we're not doing stipends for CTE, though?
There's no change proposed.
Anybody else? Onward.
Okay, so just a compensation history, starting from the bottom, 2019-20. You can see what we've done over the last several years, going all the way up to the current year where we're in 21-22. Most notably, the $1,000 retention payment that we did just a few months ago using ESSER funds. But 22-23, you can see now we're getting into more of the details. Right now, what's being considered for employees on the hiring schedule, which includes teacher, nurse, librarian, counselor, and a whole host of other positions which are tied to the teacher salary schedule, is $1,250, which is being proposed currently. A 2% general increase or a midpoint increase is being considered. We're also considering a 4% increase on the midpoint for auxiliary positions, of which there are several different classifications under the auxiliary group.
Could you give an example of that?
So let me talk about that element of it a little bit. So auxiliary means custodial, child nutrition, transportation, maintenance, some police officers. That's the definition of the word auxiliary as it applies to Northside. I'm not suggesting that would be necessarily exactly the same everywhere, although largely it would be. That is for two reasons. That is both, and these two reasons don't always line up, frankly, but this year they do. That is the area where generally we are struggling with regard to the market because this is a space that folks have had so much challenge hiring in that they have raised pay, not in kind of the normal cadence of events where you approve a budget, you set a pay grade, you never touch it essentially until the next year when you have the same conversation. That hasn't happened in the last year or so, especially with regard to this auxiliary group of employees. We had the conversation earlier about substitutes and how mobile, if you will, that market has been in the last several months. The same can be said of some of these groups as well. And so we're trying to obviously get our people to market, but it's also some of the areas where we struggle to hire the most, right? So these things, while they don't always line up, as a matter of fact, rarely have they lined up in the last 10 years, but this year they do. And that's the rationale for looking at 4 for this group, 4% increase for this group of employees.
Brian, would it be possible, in fact, I would like a list of who falls within the auxiliary
That's no problem.
midpoint,
By-
not just an example
There
of,
are-
but
There are 5 groups of employees, and I just listed them for you, but we can give you much more detailed position lists.
list those again, I'm sorry.
Transportation, maintenance, custodial, child nutrition, some police officers,
Okay,
5.
Can we have a list of that?
You're welcome to list in any amount of detail you like.
and then general midpoint?
That's everybody else on a midpoint schedule. So that's everybody else
Except for
except
teachers,
for
nurses?
mostly teachers, nurses, counselors, librarians are covered under that step schedule.
Right,
Everybody else, from instructional assistants to deputy superintendent, is covered under a midpoint schedule.
so that's our IAs. Is on this.
Secretaries,
Yeah.
everybody, but it goes all the way through the system. It's IAs are that other group, the non-auxiliary group, covers a massive range of positions, right? Huge range of positions. So what we're talking about is carving out this one group where we're struggling with market and we're having some of the most trouble hiring, and looking at 4 for them, 2 for everybody else, is essentially a summary of the compensation plan.
Okay, and what is the state-based starting salary now? Renee, do you know what that is?
28, 29,000.
Is
People
it still,
pay
I mean,
so
it was
far above
20,
it.
it was 28 a long time ago, I just,
Somebody can Google it. I don't know. We've
32?
I've been here 30 years. We've never paid close to the state minimum.
Well, no, I know that, but I didn't know if the state,
Just saw it, it's like 30,000.
if the state had increased the state base, because for years it was
In-
28.
In association with House Bill 3 passing in 2019, it did increase. To my knowledge, it hasn't increased since then, but yeah, it's well below what we pay a teacher with 0 years of experience.
Okay, and
There you go, 33,660.
thank you.
Helpy Helperton.
Our starting pay will be well over $20,000 in excess of that.
Right, I know that wasn't, that had been a question that I was asked the other day, and I wasn't sure what it was. So with this increase, so right now, Northside teachers are highest in Bear County, is my understanding,
At most experience levels, that's true.
at most experienced levels. We don't know what other school districts are gonna do, and really, I'm not really
Other
concerned about
than-
what other districts are doing,
Yeah,
but.
right, and we can't worry about that.
Yeah.
Other than what folks have shared in private conversations, we don't know the answer to that.
Okay, and then, can you explain, because every time we do a compensation change, there is always the confusion with our teachers, and personally with me, in relation to, there is a step amount, and then there's our increase.
You said it well. So a general increase, or any kind of increase, applies to everyone in the schedule. So if we want to talk about teachers, where there's some additional confusion, because back to Mr. Lopez's earlier point, there is a differential between a 0-year experience and a 1, and a 2 and a 10, right? There are differentials in pay based on years of experience. The delta between year 1 and year 2, year 9 and year 10, year 28 and year 29 is what's called a step. It's a space. It's a delta. It's not, while it is a dollar amount, when you hear folks talk about a step increase, that's simply, I moved from experience year 8 to experience year 9, or experience year 19 to experience year 20. The increase applies to everybody the same. So in our way of compensating, we do not use the phrase step increase. Doesn't apply to us. A step is just a space represented by dollars between years of experience, down the list.
So if I'm a teacher going to be a new teacher in Northside, I'm going to be a 20-year teacher in Northside, I'm going to see, well, the new teacher wouldn't, let's use a second-year teacher. I'm going to see a $1,250 increase across the board.
Not exactly. Well,
Because-
yes,
be-
exactly.
because it-
You're across the board. If I am a teacher on a step schedule in Northside, I will see a $1,250 increase in my pay from this year to next year.
Because Brian, what has always been confusing, and it's been hard to explain to our teachers, is when we got the chart of teacher salaries, and it averaged, and so you would have teachers below or at the lower level seeing exactly what we said, $1,250.
Actually, more than that, frankly.
Yeah,
Because
because
when
it was
when
it
you
was an
apply it to an
average
average across all those people, which is what we've done for
ever.
8 or 10 plus years, you get, everybody gets the same dollar amount, but it, as a percentage of total salary, the number is slightly different. If I'm a 0 or a 1 or a 2-year experienced teacher, it's more than 2% of my total salary. If I'm a 28 or a 29-year teacher, it's
It's less.
slightly less than 2%.
Right.
Because it's $1,250.
And that was what was so confusing, is because we'd see that, teachers would see that and say, well, but you're not giving me 2%, I'm only getting
That's why we try to talk about it very
8%.
specifically and very early on as a dollar figure. It is a dollar figure. It just happens to apply the same way that same 2% will apply to every other midpoint position. It's 2% of the midpoint. If I'm above midpoint, I don't get the full 2%. If I'm below midpoint, I get slightly more than 2%.
Yeah, on the midpoint, it's different, but I'm talking about just the teachers that are on the salary schedule.
It's a
Because then
dollar
there's,
amount.
then the other piece that comes into that discussion is I've had teachers say, okay, well, that's, Northside is giving me the $1,250, but the state is giving me that difference on the step, but that's not true. Because we,
Again, we
and
need to
that's the
take the
reason-
word step out of our vocabulary when we
Well,
talk about
but-
compensation.
Brian, that's the reason that I asked what was the state base, is because we've always paid above state base.
Of course,
And
thousands
so
and thousands of dollars.
that is not something else that's factored into the amount. So we are giving a $1,250 raise to all of our employees that are on a schedule.
That's what's proposed,
That's what's being proposed.
and you're getting ready to see the cost of that.
Okay. The only thing I will add that I'm concerned about is, and I know that we get a lot of anecdotal things that come to us from citizens to be heard, but I do think that from just talking to teachers, and again, that's anecdotal, but in talking to teachers during the bond, when we were working polls and just, in general, that we are having an attrition issue in relation to IAs, and that we've had where teachers have said, I've been pulled to go help because we haven't had an IA, or I have X number of students that need to have IAs and they don't have them. So I guess, Brian, that's
Go
why
back to slide 7, Monica,
I'm concerned about that.
first line item. What we did is we went and we looked at IAs because while they're not an auxiliary group, they have been very hard to hire and retain. And so we looked at those first two, special education, which is where the bulk of instructional assistants are employed. you can see a $1 million adjustment for that group alone.
So it will be helpful
Market adjustment.
for us to understand, or me, I don't know how the rest of the board feels, but it'll be easier for me to understand, Brian, if I'm saying RIAs are gonna get a 2% general midpoint. They're also going to get some type of increase, but because when you give me a figure of 1,069,000, that's not telling me, Brian, what exactly it is that
And it would be impossible to tell you.
we are giving to self-contained and general IAs.
Because there's many levels of IAs. There's all kinds of IAs. They're not just those two groups. Many groups are IAs, including LVNs are paid on an IA scale. What we're trying to do is adjust them to market. And while some of those folks need small market adjustments, like classroom teacher aide, library aide, licensed vocational nurse, some of them need substantial market adjustments, like those that work in special education, both in general special education settings as well as in self-contained special education settings.
Then what would be helpful is to understand what is the market amount, the market salary that we are looking at to give us an idea of where we raised.
We can give some examples of it.
That would be,
And we can give some examples in the most common area, like BMC IA or general special education IA. We can give a sense of that, but know that it's a snapshot, right? It's one position in one of dozens and dozens of positions that are paid on an IA pay grade.
but to me right now, in the situation that we find ourselves and with the budget that we're looking at, it would be beneficial to be able to see some of those examples so that I have a better feel,
problem.
Brian, of what a 2% general midpoint increase means when you look at the additional salary adjustments that we're making.
We'll run some calculations. We'll send them to you in Friday letter. It's easy to do.
That'll be perfect. Thank you.
All right, back to slide 9.
Okay, so now we're looking at what is all this going to cost us, broken out by fund. What's good for the goose is good for the gander, so there's no employee, just, where they're paid from who's not included in this. Child nutrition, of course, being one of the other funds the board will consider for adoption in August, and then the other funds are just other funds, could be federal funds that are included here. So, but we're talking about the general fund today, the biggest of all. So all of that taken into account, the 2% midpoint increase, 4% auxiliary that we talked about, reclassification, stipends, and other adjustments, and the market adjustments is just under $20 million, 19.5. And then going across child nutrition, it's 897,000, all other funds combined, 1.2, for a grand total of about $21.7 million.
Just give us an example of other funds.
Child
Title
nutrition.
I, well, child nutrition
Child
is.
nutrition is
Is
separated.
already there, so you have Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV, ESSER, 3.
That's fine. I just
Okay.
wanted to know when you lump other funds, what is lumped into that.
Biggest is child nutrition by far, because it's such a big group of them.
Right, and we pulled that out, but it's just, I was just curious what the others were.
Yeah. All right, so that's what we have for you with regard to compensation. We got a couple of asks for additional information, which we're happy to share with the board, kind of tell me who auxiliary is. We'll give you a very detailed list if you want it. And some examples of kind of once you make both adjustments on an instructional assistant, what was it this year and what is the proposed to be for next year? We can do that.
And then, I'm sorry, one more. So when we're talking about the market on auxiliary, which is what pulls in our maintenance, so how do we, because the market right now for skilled labor, electricians, carpenters, painters, is very high when talking to general contractors. So how do we balance that when we're talking about those positions?
Yeah, some, when you do a market analysis on teachers, it's pretty straightforward, right? You look at surrounding districts, you look at who competes for teachers, who's even close on your salary, so forth. When you do it for other positions like custodial or some secretarial positions, or certainly skilled trade labor, you have to look at not only what are school districts doing, but you have to try to look at even though it adjusts on a daily basis these days, what's going on in the world outside of that. Now, sometimes, and this will be one of them, we cannot approach those costs.
Right.
And so we'll do the best we can, and that's reflected in the 4%, frankly. But we do try to do that with some positions that are not unique to schools, right? Custodial is one of them. Police officers is one of them. Certainly, plumbers and electricians and carpenters are some of them. But again, especially with regard to plumbers and electricians and people who really have a skill set in that space, HVAC folks, us trying to meet the private market, who is working those people 60, 70 hours a week, nights and weekends, which I won't say we never do it, but we try not to do it. We cannot in this market meet that demand.
So when we go back to slide 7, the market salary adjustments, we don't have that group listed here. We say auxiliary positions, and you've got some examples, and then other positions at 26,000. So we're not doing any kind of
We're not.
increase. So the only thing that we're seeing on that those auxiliary positions is
Straight 4%.
is straightforward 4%.
Of the midpoint.
Wow.
That's correct. All right, so what you have seen so far represents, I mentioned to you before we got started, about roughly a $45 million total cost addition to the budget, to the current budget. What you've seen so far accounts for roughly 20 million of that in the general fund. So we're getting ready now to move to growth and improvement.
Okay, so growth
We're on
and-
slide 10 for those
Yes.
paying attention.
So you're playing at home. For the GNI, as Dr. Woods mentioned, is $25.2 million, and we'll cover the majority of it here. You can see how it's broken up into different components. New elementary startup, we will be opening Reed Elementary in 24? So we need to get ready the year before, so you can see there's some cost associated, $269,000. New school base, well, the Sotomayor and the 2 magnets are opening up this August, so those are the costs that are embedded in the proposed budget moving forward. As you can see, there's 82 FTEs, of which the board has already approved last month for the campus-based units as we're moving forward. And that's $6.8 million for that campus, those campuses rather, the magnets.
Just to be clear, Jones and Zachary are in years 2 and 3 and 2 respectfully, but as we add students, the base needs to grow to keep up with additional students. Because remember, each year, through this year for Jones and through next year for Zachary, we'll continue to add a grade level or cohort of children. So that's what we're covering here. By far and away, the largest cost here is the opening of a comprehensive high school, which I know is not surprising.
Magnet school coordinator is, I know that we changed what we're calling our magnet school leaders, not principals.
Yeah.
So we're calling the magnet school person a director.
Correct.
So magnet school director. So what is a magnet school coordinator?
More like a program coordinator like you'd see at the high school magnet programs.
Okay.
Similar position.
And so we don't have those at the very beginning per se, but we do as our
That
population.
you fill out.
As our population increases.
That's right.
Where do our magnet school directors fall in relation to their salary?
I have to get you the pay grade. Don't know it off the top of my head.
Okay, I would like to know kind of where they are falling in relation to principals, vice principals,
Tiffany, you
assistant
keeping a
principals
list for me? Okay, we'll send you that.
on that. Thank you.
All right, slide 11.
Okay, so now, the other 100 positions, again, that the board has already approved last month, that we call campus-based units or CBUs, listed here, for a grand total of $7.7 million.
Yeah, these are ones, and again, they fit the theme, right? Special education, newcomer teachers to handle incoming refugee students, and bilingual.
Okay.
These
So
were approved in April.
let me ask you, because I know that we've always prided ourselves on our ratio of administration we've always been lower than what the state's ratio is on, I guess you would call it non-campus-based administrators, so central
Called the
office.
administrative cost ratio.
Yeah.
Okay, administrative cost ratio. We've always been lower than the state on that, but we keep hearing, again, anecdotal, because I'm really not quite sure I understand exactly where the lack of support is when we talk to our teachers. I think I don't feel supported. Probably encompasses a large base of things. But one thing I do want us to look at, Brian, and I know I'm talking about more money, but do we need to look at what we are doing from it? Because we have not really, Brian, in a long time, really come in and evaluated, and we're asking our administrative staff to take on more and more and more. So I know that on some campuses, particularly when we have Title I monies, we will look and allocate additional support. But have we looked at that within the scope of this budget?
No, and don't plan to, frankly. It is what it is. These are the areas of student need, can't vary. There's no room for that. Unless, again, as I mentioned to you before, something else is cut. And frankly, if you ask me to prioritize top 10 needs, wouldn't make top 10. Make top 20, but it wouldn't make top 10. And this is a top 5 type budget, not a top 20 type budget.
That's worrisome. Thank you.
I'm afraid we better get used to that.
Renee, I have a question on the, on the campus-based units, when we talk about middle school counselors, how many counselors are we talking about? Do we have a
2
number?
full units. So
Whole
what we've
units, and will
tried,
they be at the, which campuses? Will they be at, because I'm looking at, will they be at Zachary?
what we've done is try to keep middle school counseling staffs from being split between more than one, in more than one campus. This is a continuation of that effort. It just requires 2 additional units to continue to pull off. So that's the adjustment that was asked for.
Okay. Thank you.
And then what we'll be bringing to the board for approval in June, I believe. Is that right, Tiffany? June? For the
Yes.
non-CBUs, as I call them, 12 FTEs for $1.6 million, and you see them listed here.
So obviously, a lot of technology support needed. I think you understand the reason for that. Dyslexia the rules have changed substantially in the last 2 years. I think you're aware of that situation. So that is obviously a need. There are some additional special education supports and individual support teachers in social emotional lessons in classrooms, a health education instructional assistant. You see pre-K, and you see network technical engineers, which are people we used to pay with bond funds back when the bonds were paying for the lion's share of student and staff use technology. Since we've moved that into the general fund, we don't feel it's justified to leave that in the bond expenses any longer, so we're moving that out to the general fund.
Dr. Harrell.
So real quick, it says 12 FTEs, but that's more. Is it plural, like social emotional learning instructional support teachers? Are the FTEs?
No, ma'am, I believe that's one
Just
unit.
one teacher?
One central office support to
Oh, it's
create
in central
supports.
office.
Remember, these are the non-campus based.
Right, so they go out to the campuses.
Correct,
They're
correct.
not living here.
Campus support. Yeah.
Yes,
Right.
ma'am.
Okay,
Correct.
that's what campus support, so just one. I got you.
Correct.
I get it. Thanks.
Brian, what's a transition specialist?
That's a special education position that helps students transition to some degree level to level, but more from high school to what's next? That's required by federal law.
Not here, but so I don't forget this, at academics, Joseph, if we could, I would like to have just a refresher on the levels in special ed and what responsibility is what. Because you have a special ed teacher, you have a special ed aide, you have then a coordinator. I mean, there's a lot of
Oh,
different
yeah.
levels within
Yeah, yeah.
special ed. And I
Of
would,
the employees, you mean?
right, and I would just like to understand
fine.
how all those positions, kind of a roadmap of how they all interact and whose responsibility is what.
Got it.
Thank you.
We can do that. Janice, you got that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, moving on.
Okay, and the next slide, to round out all the items currently in growth and improvement, we just put these under other initiatives, about 8.7. In dollar amount order, so the very first one, of course, as we've talked about at the Finance Committee, is the increase in health insurance that we know that the board will consider, in fact, next week, for us to have one more year with our current healthcare provider for purchase insurance. And we do know that they're asking for an increase in premiums overall, so currently, we're looking at completing, or still doing the 70-30 split in the aggregate, and the cost of the general fund has been calculated at about 2.2 million, which would cover us from January of 2023 all the way to August, because remember, the plan year for health insurance is on a calendar year. And the others listed throughout there. If you have any questions about those, we can certainly address them.
So state comp ed are positions that used to be funded with high school allotment. As you know, with House Bill 3, high school allotment went away. It got replaced with some in a very fractional way with
CMS.
career and college readiness funding. It does not cover anything close to the cost that high school allotment did. So those positions are having to be recoded under the general fund. You know about testing and the numbers of students we have taking especially advanced placement testing. Utility cost increases speaks for itself. We experience the exact same thing as a school district that everyone does as a homeowner. Kindergarten instructional materials is an initiative that we began 1 year ago or 2 years ago, Janice? Kindergarten instructional material. 2 years ago. Property insurance, I think that's fully understandable. Grounds maintenance, physical education equipment, and so forth. And you can see the dollars bleed down after that. This list covers 81% of the total cost.
What is the high school auditorium stage acoustics phase 2?
That's another initiative that we tried to split into 3 years so it didn't impact the budget so much in any 1 year. But it's literally going back to our older high schools where we haven't yet done renovation work. And of course, in the case of Clark, aren't getting ready to do renovation work, and trying to literally do that, improve the acoustics in a small way, because you can make some adjustments that don't require tearing the walls down. And so that was something James has been talking about for a number of years.
Is that including design? Is that what that also includes?
No.
Design, any of that, or
No, I think some of
it's
it
just more like
is,
aesthetic?
no, it's some of it's performance shells that improves, the quality of our performance. We've done that with it. I want to say there's been some adjustments, more permanent adjustments to facilities with it, one-time type adjustments. Unfortunately, in those older facilities, the quality of the performing space, and I'm talking from very partial knowledge here, is just not what it would be in something built in the last 10 or 15 years. And in the ones, because those projects are so large and so expensive, as you all know, we've been including one in a bond issue. Holmes, getting ready to kick off John Jay. Clark is approved now in the 2022. So it's going to be a slow process. So when I look at one that was built in the early 80s, Taft, it's going to be a while before we're able to return to Taft.
We need to,
And so if there are small things we can do to improve the quality, even fractionally, I agree with James. It's worth small amounts of money in order to do it. So I believe this finishes out that project.
I remember Holmes before we did the new
course,
auditorium.
yeah.
That the acoustics got really poor
Yeah, it's
in
just,
there.
it's an old facility.
The grounds maintenance contract, we have a service that does our
We combine it, Ms. Saldana. We have some permanent staff. The issue in San Antonio is that if you employ enough permanent staff to do it during eras like the period that we're in right now, there's not much for them to do, because if it doesn't rain for 6, 8, 10, 15 weeks at a time, there's just not as much. So it's actually cheaper than employing folks full-time to employ a staff full-time that can go out anywhere on any day, but then to contract the rest of it out. It's actually cheaper to do it that way.
You could bid those out.
Yeah, we competitively bid it, like anything else.
And what is the benefit consultants' fees?
This is the delta that we are paying the benefits consultant to help us with getting to the transition to self-funding in 2024. So that's that budget.
And if you can provide in Friday letter who that is?
Yeah, we'll
Probably
remind
have,
you.
but if
You
you-
know, but we'll remind you
Yeah.
who that is.
If you'll just remind, because it's not the group that Frank Halamuda worked with before.
We changed.
Okay, if you'll just remind us of that. Thank you.
All right, we're to slide 14.
Oh, and no budget presentation will be complete without a pie chart. So we just basically took the information, the 25.2 million that's currently in G&I, and broke it up between new school startup, new school base, and then, of course, the other. And you can kind of see how that's laid out.
So the one positive thing I will say about this budget is it does include the opening of a high school. That is a relatively, uncommon. We don't do it every year. And so when you take that out in the next few years, we at least won't have that multi-million-dollar element to growth and improvement that we're facing. Now, it's an issue we got to deal with right now. And obviously it's recurring. Almost everything we're talking about here is
It's
recurring.
recurring cost.
But it won't be one that we will see again and again and again. And from a budget perspective, that's a good thing. All right, almost done.
And just some information for board members if they want to go into G&I and look for yourself at the different packages. Here are the instructions for which you can get in.
And if you want to, you can see gory detail.
Does anybody have a hard copy?
No, we don't make them.
It's all online.
Yes, ma'am. That's how we review it. That's how folks submit it. That's how they're approved or more often declined.
And then last is just some final steps. We've been talking about, where we are with the budget development. Well, it's getting to that time in June when really things start to come together. So we've been working on this essentially since January, but now we're getting to that point where we have to start doing all the procedural things regarding getting the MCR calculated, which won't be until July, right? So during the month of June, we are still, if the superintendent wishes for us to show where we are with the budget development at the end of June, keep in mind, as the Brits like to say, the other penny's gonna drop, right? That's the revenue side, but keep in mind, that is gonna be based on some estimates of ADA, MCR, which really work in conjunction with each other, but then throughout the month of July, which we historically have not really met with the board, we're gonna be waiting for certified values, which come to us about July 23rd, 24th. We drop those in, we know what our MCR is gonna be. Early August, that's when we are preparing everything for the board to call for the public hearing, and we go through that whole process all over again during the month of August, or the hot days of August as we go through that. But unfortunately, the way it works now, we talked about, the lag not being there anymore, where we used to take it, especially if you're a district that was growing in property value, you took advantage of the lag. Now, unfortunately, we have to wait around to figure out what is our MCR going to be because we don't have our certified values. And unless the legislature changes the law that requires appraisal districts to get us our certified values sooner, we're always going to be in this situation, unfortunately. Now, the one good thing is that we are a September 1 district. For those districts that are July 1, it's even worse for them because they are just trying to adopt a budget around a lot of unknowns. So it's a better place to be in, the fact that we have what I call a normal fiscal year for a school district. So
Even with the increase in property value challenges or protests, would that affect the date at which we would know what that might be?
all that would do is that when we receive our certified values, the 3 counties, you look at what's ARB approved, and then you look at what's under ARB, and that number will probably be higher than in years past, given the fact that I think tomorrow is the deadline to a protest. So we may see more people protesting, but remember, we can put those two numbers together because we know eventually if anybody is protesting the value of their home, at some point in September, October, November, a value is going to come off of the ARB and come onto our rolls, right? So that's what we have to figure out, was how much is the ARB going to reduce the value of this home because somebody is protesting. So there's an art to that, to figure out how much do we want to think we're going to be able to tax on. So unfortunately, that's the situation we're going to be in with, I think, so many people protesting their values, so.
And you're making, as in every year, an educated guess. It's just this year, because we anticipate a much higher number in ARB, there'll be more guessing going on. It's just the way it is.
Brian, in the growth and improvement, is that everything that was submitted, or is it just what y'all have approved?
Oh, no. This is only what has gone through multiple rounds of cuts.
Okay.
And if I'm not happy with where we decide revenue comes again, we'll have another round of cuts, and you'll see a much smaller package in June.
Okay.
All right.
And that would be the end of that agenda
It
item,
would.
unless there's any other questions.
Thank you. Thank you.
A lot of work, and we're not done,
I'm done.
but thank you.
The
Yeah.
only reason I would anticipate a called meeting in June would be if we decided we had to make substantial downward adjustment to budget, which in turn causes substantial downward adjustment to the GNI recommendation. If that does not happen, I don't think we'll need a budget meeting in June, but just wanted to forecast that.
Okay.
Obviously, we'll make that decision before that time.
Okay. On to the canvassing. Dr. Woods.
Yes, ma'am. So as we do after every election involving the school district, whether it be a trustee election or a bond election, the board calls a meeting to canvass the return. So there are multiple attachments in your agenda item. If you will look at the one called canvassing, a resolution canvassing, this lays out what the work of the board. So if you see on page 2, you recall we had one proposition on this particular bond. You can see the vote totals for and against that you're probably familiar with by now. And essentially what we're saying is, yep, those look right. And the board does need to act on canvassing, and there are a couple of documents that are required to be signed by both the board president and by the secretary.
Does it have to be the whole board? Or it could just be this body right now?
Oh, yes, sir. As a matter of fact, for the item called canvassing, there's a unique section in the law that allows the board to canvass with 2 members present. So anything more than 2, we're good to go.
So there's 6 of us here.
So should be easy to do.
Is there a motion?
I move approval of the canvassing of the votes for the bond.
So we have a motion and a second to approve this.
You know what? I'm not think that's right. I think I've approved the results of the canvass. I move approval for the results of the
I think
canvassing of the
the
bond.
resolution approving the canvassing is
Canvassing of
good
the
to
bond.
go.
Okay.
Yep, good to go.
Then correct that to approve, move approval of the resolution
Regarding canvassing.
regarding the canvassing of the votes.
And there's still a second? Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. And I gotta say, yay.
Yeah, absolutely. Which
This
we
was
almost
a,
never take time to say, but yeah.
this was a great accomplishment, and thanks to our community for their support of this. I know that this
Absolutely.
was a lot of work on behalf of staff and some trustees, all trustees who work to help educate our community on to what was in this bond.
Yes, well said.
And I know that all trustees were braving the heat on May the 7th to
That
be
is
at
a
the
fact.
polls
That was no fun.
That is a fact.
to answer our questions from our community.
That's a fact. Although,
All right.
yeah.
Oh, what did I do?
All right.
here?
So we do need to go briefly to closed session. Ms. Freeman, we do have a couple of appointments we'd like to recommend to the board.
And I would like to move into the superintendent's office for closed session. Are you okay with that, Brian?
I am. I think we'll be in there
We'll be
three to
there.
5 minutes.
Exactly, but I still want to move into the superintendent's office.
Okay. With that,
And I have completely, I don't know what I did with my computer.
the Board of Trustees on May 17th, 2022. Let's give us 5 minutes to get there. So at 7:40, we'll convene in closed meeting in accordance with Texas Government Code Section 551.071, 551.072, .073, 074, 076, 082, and 084. All right, the Board of Trustees on May 17th, 2022, beginning at 7:51 p.m. will convene in open meeting. Action will take place on the following items: appointment of Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources and appointment of Director of Payroll. Is there a motion?
I have a motion.
Yes, ma'am.
I move that we accept the positions as presented in executive session.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the appointments in executive session. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Ayes have it, motion carries, and the board ended, or will end its meeting at 7:52 p.m. on May 17th, 2022. Thank y'all.
Thanks.
Good meeting.